The first time I committed suicide by slitting my wrist due to depression, my mother slapped me. In the ward, he pinched my wrist and said angrily, "Aren't you going to die? How can you die if you cut so shallowly? You should chop off your claws." Later, as he wanted, I jumped out of the corridor on the 7th floor of the school, and my blood flowed far away, and I was surrounded by the screams of my classmates and teachers. Unfortunately, I can't see my mother's expression. Announced the rankings of this final exam. The head teacher said as he opened the roster in his hand. He is used to chanting from front to back in order. This is the time when I am most nervous. The first place is not my name, and the second place is not me. My heartbeats are getting faster and faster. It was not until the 10th place that the head teacher chanted 2 words lightly, "Chen Yuan, 10th place." This is the worst time I have ever had since I was a child. It's over, this time it's definitely over. My head exploded like fireworks, and even my hands began to tremble unconsciously. Since I was sick, whenever I was nervous, this uncontrollable physiological condition has become my nightmare. I couldn't help but think of my dad's roar and my mom's slap. "You are not studying at all, how can you get into college?" I even had a little despicable and lucky idea, why don't you just tell them that the grades have come out? Just say that there was a problem with the school's academic affairs office system and the final exam scores were erased. But the next moment, the head teacher's words abolished my delusion. "On the Chen Yuan, come with me. Our class teacher is famous for being awesome." He walked out of the classroom and stood outside the school corridor with me. "Yuan Chen, your grades have dropped a lot this time. I don't know what happened to you, but with the level of your performance in this exam, it is difficult to get to the original C9 goal." I trembled and said, "Teacher, I'm sorry." "What are you sorry for? Are you sorry for me? Did you learn from me?" This sentence seemed to make the head teacher even more unhappy. "Chen Yuan, tell me yourself. Since you were in the 3rd year of high school, have you not focused on studying at all? In half a year, will you give up on yourself like this?" After the class teacher said that, he looked at me again. "Call me when you go back and call me. Your parents come here and I will talk to them about your situation at home." My knees became weak and I almost knelt in front of my class teacher. "Teacher, can you not call your parents over?" The head teacher looked at me almost contemptuously. "Are you afraid that your parents will be disappointed? In this way, I will call your parents now, and don't wait for the future." As he said that, the head teacher took out his cell phone. At that moment, the string that collapsed in my mind broke, as if the world was black. Roars and scoldings came one after another. "Look at others, can you compare with the first place? Why can't you get the full mark? Is it easy for your parents to raise you so big? Why are you so tired when you live? Why do you have to bear the expectations of others? Living." I jumped hard onto the railings of the corridor. "Teacher, if I die, this matter has nothing to do with you." After that, I jumped down. In everyone's eyes, my mother is a rare and good mother. I am an only child, and my parents have been extremely strict with me since I was a child. I hope my daughter can be used to my mother Wang Qinglian. One of the words she often said is, "You must be able to do what others can do, and you must do better." But she never cared about me what I wanted. The last moment in memory was to jump off the 7-story teaching building. It was very noisy around. Oh my god, someone committed suicide. It seemed like Chen Yuan from class 4. Has anyone beat 120? The blood flowed far away. I closed my eyes. But even though I was clearly dead, my soul was still pulled back to my mother. I couldn't do anything, so I could only watch him and his sisters have dinner at the restaurant downstairs, just like I had eaten countless times before. They talked about their children's learning and raising children again. For such a thing, I still have to ask Wang Qinglian, how could she give birth to such a good child? Share educational experience. Sister Wang, Chen Yuan's college entrance examination this year, I guess he can go to Peking University, right? Peking University or Tsinghua University? Listening to the friend's flattery, a smug smile appeared on my mother's face. She shook the cup in her hand and said with a smile, "My schoolchin has good grades in science. I hope he can go to a better university in science and engineering." Before she could finish her words, her mother's cell phone suddenly rang. "Is it Chen Yuan's mother? This is Wu Gao. Come to the school quickly." Chen Yuan jumped off the building. The mother was stunned and cursed suddenly. "Chen Yuan is here again? You tell him to be happy if you want to seek death. If you play so many tricks, are you tired?" After that, she hung up the phone. The friend next to him asked curiously, "What's the matter? Are you anxious?" My mother shook her head. "It's okay, it's just that Chen Yuan's adolescence has arrived." He is rebellious and always wants to attract my attention. Actually, she never thought I was sick. When she was diagnosed with depression in the hospital 2 years ago, she took the confirmation notice and sneered at me. Depression is just a trick made online. Who would really die because of this kind of thing? Later, I was careless in one exam and lost points on the last big question of mathematics. She beat me and threw away the medicine I took every night, saying that it was all the medicine that made me feel bad. To be honest, you are careless, so why don't you die? That time I was so anxious at night that I really cut my wrist with a knife and was sent to the hospital for emergency treatment. After waking up, my mother saw that I was not anxious, afraid, but disappointed. Yuan Chen, you can't even get through such a little setback. What big thing can you do in the future? Look at Liang Jing, why are they not as pretentious as you? When did parents worry a little? Liang Jing is the daughter of my aunt's family. This time she was admitted to a university in Beijing and was very polite. He is still pretty, and since childhood, the most I have heard is, why can't you compete with Liang Jing? But I didn't expect that even if I die, she would pull out this cousin's mother. Although I knew she couldn't hear it, I still whispered, I'm really dead this time, and I won't worry you anymore. I don't know if I sensed something, but my mother took out her cell phone again. She stared at the screen blankly, her fingers trembled slightly, and finally dialed the phone call she had just called from the school. My mother, Chen Yuan? Where have you been? Mother's voice was a little hoarse, and she asked hesitantly. Teacher, Chen Yuan, you are mentally prepared. Ms. Wang, class teacher, interrupted her mother. The situation is very bad, we have called the police. Legal matters, wait until you and your husband come, okay? The phone fell on the table and made a bang. My mother's lips were trembling. He was not a person who had seen many big scenes. Whenever he was at a loss, his physical tension would betray him as soon as possible. Finally, my mother seemed to have spent a lot of effort to stand up. He ignored the gazes of others and the questions he had thrown out, grabbed his cell phone and left the hotel. Sitting in the taxi, he started calling me. After more than a dozen calls, no one answered me. When I jumped down, my phone was placed in my school uniform pants and it was smashed with me. How could it be even more punctual? The driver probably noticed something wrong with his mother. He glanced at the pale middle-aged woman in the passenger seat and comforted him. It must be something wrong now. I'll go to the phone later. I don't know which nerve of my mother this sentence touched, but he suddenly shouted, it's all liars. Liars? The teaching building was blocked by a yellow cordon, and I followed my mother back to Wugao, the place I saw last time during my lifetime. My father had already rushed over from the company first and was discussing with the teacher of the school's academic affairs office. Where is my daughter's body? My daughter had no problems at all. She was still jumping around when she left home this morning. But now you tell me that she jumped off the building and died? How should the school bear this responsibility? My father's voice was very big, you can hear it from afar. My mother stopped, and when she heard the words I'm dead from her father, he seemed stupid and wouldn't move at all, just staring at her father blankly. My father's face was flushed and he almost jumped up. I am just such a child. This is my only child. I raised her until I was 18 years old, and I was just pretending to be a fool by you. The first time I saw my father's excited side, half like tears and snot flying out together. The teachers rushed up quickly, some people clamped their hands, some people hugged their waists and held them down. Mr. Chen, please calm down first. The investigation results have not yet come out. We will wait for the police to conclude. We can understand your mood, but the school cannot completely stop many things. Fuck. If I don't give me an explanation today, I will never leave the school. I will not allow anyone to take Chen Yuan's body away. My father yelled. Hearing this sentence, the director of the academic affairs office's face changed. He took a step forward and whispered to his father, Mr. Chen, in this weather, our school really has no place to preserve Chen Yuan's body specifically. You must not want to see your daughter rotten or deteriorate. The father didn't say anything, but just stared at the director's face. After a while, the academic affairs director seemed to finally make up his mind. Okay, we can. Qin Jifeng. At this time, the mother suddenly called her father. He strode forward, with one hand away from the teacher surrounding him, and said, I want to know what happened before Chen Yuan died. There should be surveillance, right? He paused and added. The academic affairs director sighed and called the security department staff up. The monitoring started with me following the head teacher out of the classroom. Because the school equipment was upgraded and renovated in the past few years, the monitoring facilities were equipped with sound pickers, so I could hear the conversation with the head teacher. There was no fight or quarrel, and it looked a bit strange. The turning point seemed to happen at that moment. The head teacher picked up his cell phone and wanted to call my parents, and a look of panic and fear appeared on my face. The director pointed to the screen and said carefully, "Our teacher has no extreme movements or language. Of course, we will definitely punish him seriously. But you have also seen it," before student Chen jumped down. I said that this matter has nothing to do with the teacher. The director said this last sentence clearly lacked confidence, and he kept secretly looking at my parents. "What do you say? What do you mean? Shifting responsibility, right?" My father shouted with his neck, and his mother interrupted him. "Qin Jifeng." Mother looked at the director. "Didn't you hear Chen Yuan's last words?" In such a chaotic occasion, the mother seemed like an alien, with a strange calmness, as if unexpectedly she had flattened his emotions. "I want to go to Chen Yuan's classroom." At this time, our entire senior high school had already finished school early, and my original senior high school class 3 and 4 seemed empty and quiet. The afternoon sun shone through the window, and the desks were filled with textbooks, exercise books, exam papers like hills, and even the aisles were stacked with test questions. Although I no longer have any entity, I feel a little melancholy and confused when I see this place I once fought for. Dreams, we used to talk about these two words, but now when we look back, I don't know what my dreams are. Is it a good university? Do you live better than others? It seems that everyone thinks so. This is a dream and the meaning of life. But Mom, I'm not happy. I was tall, with my seat in the back row against the window, and no one had touched the table, exactly the same as when I left. My mother slowly walked over and sat down, and he picked up a few notebooks. "That's my wrong question set." I have a habit of writing my thoughts when I corrected the wrong question next to it. So the edge of the book was densely filled with many unrelated words. "A single plank bridge with thousands of troops determines life and death, and you will get wrong such questions. It's useless, Chen Yuan, you are really useless. In the eyes of others, words like life and death may be words to motivate yourself, but for me, if I can't get into the ideal university, I really can't think of another way to live." There is a piece of paper on the last page of the wrong question book, which is the diagnosis and treatment record of my psychologist and I. My mother is resistant to my illness. She is not allowed to take medicine or see a doctor. She probably always felt that these things were useless and wasted my time and energy. At this time, she was holding the thin piece of paper, her index finger turned white and she trembled slightly. In fact, there is not much content above, but just a few words from me and the doctor. "You don't have to be so stressed, and no one stipulates that you must be perfect." I uttered, remained silent for a while, and said slowly, "I always had nightmares during this period, dreaming about the whole world, and I was the only one left. I was very lonely, and I seemed to have hallucinations, which was very abnormal." The mother put away the notebook, she covered her face and said something from her fingers. "Why? Why have you never told me these?" The father's noise came from the corridor. Young Neng Wang said that the college is in a bad state this semester, and may have depression. Whether the child is sick or not, can we still be a parent? Come out and talk about it. What other ideas do the hospital have besides today? My mother took a last look at my desk, and she rubbed her eyes, walked out of the classroom, passed through the crowd, and left like a silent alien. The father looked at his mother's back and was at a loss and shouted, "Young man Wang." My mother didn't say another word, and her mother walked out of school and returned home, locking herself in the bedroom. Soon, the news of my suicide spread among relatives and friends, and one phone call after another came to my home. Close, not close, familiar, or uninformed, or even distant cousins who had not spoken for a long time. Everyone wants to know whether I am dead or not. This is probably the most famous moment in my 18 years of life. My mother didn't want to deal with these false comforts. She threw her phone aside and stood there blankly. Suddenly a number entered her sight, Liang Jing, my cousin's phone number. My mother hesitated for a moment and finally pressed the answer button. My second aunt's cousin's voice was very slow, and she should be considering the sentence. "I heard that something happened to the hospital at school. Are you okay?" Mother nodded. For 2 minutes, neither of them spoke. The atmosphere was awkward and silent. Liang Jing asked, "Auntie, do you know that the hospital has depression?" The mother threw her cell phone aside and hesitated. "You said." In fact, the relationship between Liang Jing and I was not as bad as my mother thought. The relationship between us was just her force to rest on us. My cousin is gentle and meticulous. I like to get close to her, and she was the first to discover that I was sick. She told me what depression is, took me to see a doctor, and asked me to think about the better side of the future world, but in the end she did not leave a complete relationship. When his father came home at night, He threw the door loudly, but his mother ignored him. I miss my cousin. My cousin is on winter vacation. At noon the next day, she came over with a big cardboard box containing some things I once left with her. No matter what, it is also a relic from the hospital before his death. I thought to myself, Aunt, you may have something you want to stay, so take it over and take it to take a look. They are all small things. I didn't expect that Leung Jing kept saving a Korean group for me. I secretly chased after my family for a while when I was in junior high school and saved it with the money from lunch. There are also girl comics, youth magazines, fairy tale novels, postcards with sad and subtle styles, and animation posters bought on street stalls. I floated in the air, looking down at the small things in the box, and suddenly realized that I had interests and hobbies. For so many times, I have not always been a nerd. I used to like animation, star chasing, novels, like all my peers. But when will it start? These hobbies are not allowed, and are all defined as inaction, wasting time, and even depravity. My mother tore off my comics and novels, and the surroundings and posters were thrown out of the room as garbage. Only reference books and tutoring exercise books were allowed on the bookshelf, and all extracurricular books were no longer available. Look, the courtyard used to be so good at painting. My cousin took out a picture album from the box and opened it and handed it to her mother. I liked watching animations when I was a child, so I would copy the protagonist on the screen. I looked at one piece of painting paper after another and suddenly remembered, my original dream was to be a painter. This forgotten, suppressed, and contained dream has returned to my soul after I died. At this moment, my mother held my picture album, her eyes were red, she stared at the objects scattered on the table, and her lips trembled and murmured, "Why?" He is even willing to share these words with you, but he is unwilling to let them go. I, the mother-in-law, no? Less than a week, the police's investigation results came out. By retrieving the hospital's visit records, I was confirmed to have depression. In this case, although the school bears certain responsibilities, it is not the main party at fault. My parents did not promptly notify my teacher about my condition, which affected the school's judgment of my physical and psychological condition. These are the main factors that led to the accident. The school returned to peace. The compensation his father received was far less than he expected. After returning home, he had a big fight with his mother and complained that he didn't care about me. When the school was causing trouble, my mother did not stand on his side. In fact, to put it bluntly, it's not all because of you when Shin Yuan died. You won't be able to use it at all at critical moments. He even slapped his mother. In my eyes, my father is a traditional, paternal man. He stubbornly handed over all family affairs to his mother, and maintained a high-ranking spectator status for my growth. I committed suicide for the first time and he was working overtime in the company. I heard that I was not dead, so I felt it was nothing to do with me, so I asked the hospital to contact him. How ridiculous it is, and I haven't succeeded in my career, but I don't want to give it to my family a little attention. My mother did not quarrel with her father in the same way as before, and silence became her norm. He returned to the bedroom and started packing his luggage. In less than half a day, he packed out a suitcase and dragged the box away from the house where he had lived for more than 10 years. I followed my mother silently and watched him board the bus heading to the outskirts. My mother leaned against the car window, and the scenery outside flashed by. This somewhat old car swayed and brought her mother back to the hometown where she once lived. Many people left here, and my mother probably wouldn't have thought that she would come back. The house in my hometown is still the same old-style bungalow, which has not been repaired, so it looks particularly aging. The walls have fallen off a lot and the bricks and tiles on the roof have fallen off. My mother pushed open the door and a squeaking sound came out. A cat jumped from the tree and ran away from her feet. She slowly walked into the bedroom she used to live in. On the wall were still hanging family photos taken in the town photography hall, grandma, grandpa, aunt, mother and uncle. At that time, my mother was still in high school. Compared to the smiles of her aunt and uncle next to her, her expression seemed much more serious and quiet. Grandma gave birth to 3 children, and the mother ranked second. My aunt has a lively personality, a sweet-mouthed person, and she is also the eldest, and she is very popular with her grandmother. My uncle is a boy, and in that era, she was naturally very precious and belonged to the existence that the whole family offered, only my mother received the least love and attention. But my mother is the one who refuses to admit defeat. My aunt was good at studying and was admitted to a key high school in the town. My mother worked hard and used flashlights to do the exam in the quilt at night. She must use a higher score than my aunt. My uncle is liked by others, and a word can make the whole family laugh around him. My mother is not good at speaking, so she cleans, buys vegetables and cooks, and keeps the house organized. Grandma also said that mother is the most obedient and worry-free among the 13 children, but she has the second half of the sentence. It's just that she is very arrogant and does not make people get close to her, and she is very cold. Later, my uncle went to Europe and the family moved overseas and rarely contacted us. Only my aunt worked, got married and had children, and each one was used by her mother to secretly compare it in her heart, until this comparison continued to the next generation. Maybe my aunt never understands it, but as her own sister's mother, growing up stumbled under the shadow of her sister and brother, she may have planted a seed in her heart. Even if my career and marriage in this life are not as good as you, as long as my child is better than yours, I will beat you in my life. Before I went to elementary school, I lived in my hometown. My father worked in the city and came back a few days a month to check it out. My mother was in poor health, quit her job and took care of me in her hometown. Perhaps because of the death of a person, those memories of the first birth that have long been forgotten have returned to my mind and seem extremely clear. During the delivery period, I was hypoxia and had difficulty breathing. I had a cesarean section and consulted with other departments to give birth to me. My mother hugged me like she looked at a porcelain doll. She told her grandma that she only had one wish, which was to hope that her daughter would grow up healthy. So I was named Cheng Jumiai, which entrusted my mother with the simplest wish. But when did this wish begin to deteriorate? I grew up little by little and began to read, so my mother's wish became, you want to write 26 English letters, you have to memorize 300 Tang poems, you have to write an excellent essay with full marks. You see, even the great maternal love that has been sung for thousands of years is still greedy and inflated, always showing off one's desire. How can my child be worse than others? After a few months, my mother almost broke off contact with her former relatives and friends. She lived alone in this old house in her hometown, living a monotonous and lonely life. During the day, she would go to the town to buy vegetables, and at night she would stay alone in the bedroom, find out the things I left in my hometown when I was a child, and pick them up and take a look. On an ordinary weekend, there was a sudden bang knock on the door. My mother didn't react at first, and the knocks continued. She seemed to have come back to her senses and walked over slowly. She opened the door, and my aunt and cousin stood outside. My cousin was holding a letter bag in her arms, which contained a metal box. As my aunt walked in, she said, I have heard about the whole story. I have brought the ashes of resentment to you. The fallen leaves return to their roots. Find a day to bury the child. The mother carefully took the box from her cousin and placed it on the shelf in front of the living room. After my aunt and cousin sat down, they also brought some new news. My father almost never went home recently, but was very close to a divorced middle-aged woman. The other party is a common friend of my mother and aunt. I have met my father before and often come to our house to have dinner with everyone. My aunt said, the two of them got together so soon, and there must be signs of them, but we didn't notice it. The mother sighed, let her. I also made up my mind to get a divorce. My cousin held my mother's hand and comforted my second aunt firmly. It's still the expiration of your marriage, this is a cheating in marriage. I can help you find a familiar lawyer friend to collect evidence so that the party at fault cannot make up for the property division. To the point of benefit. The mother didn't say anything and shook her head for a while. No, just get a normal divorce. It's useless for me to ask for money now. This is what this world is like, and there is a cycle of evil consequences. After all, reality cannot develop like cool articles. But I suddenly felt that my mother actually didn't care about anything. My cousin graduated from college this year, and the autumn and spring recruitment were both smooth. Finally, she successfully signed a foreign company with generous treatment. My aunt retired for half a year and was rehired by the original school not long ago to teach, standing on the podium to answer the questions of young students. Every day, I blindly enriched my good sisters who once walked frequently with my mother. After my mother moved back to her hometown, no one of them called me to ask about her mother's recent situation. Everyone has their own life, time is like a long river, and it is impossible for me to stay on the day I die. But only the mother seemed to be at the origin. My aunt and cousin still have their own affairs, and they did not stay in their hometown to spend the night. Early in the morning, my mother came to the back mountain with the metal box brought by my cousin. I followed behind and observed the small box curiously. It turns out that after death, people are condensed into such a narrow space, completing the final conclusion of their entire life. Most of the people in the village went to the city, and many of the people who stayed were not familiar with their mothers. My mother, carrying a simple hoe alone, dug a small hole for me under a crabapple tree. Logically speaking, I should have been buried back to his hometown with my father. But my father left his hometown very early to work and had never returned to his hometown for many years. He had broken contact with the people there. In addition, in the first few years of my life, I grew up here, and my roots seemed to be in this village. My mother buried my urn in the ground and sprinkled with soil to form a small mound. She sat quietly with her back against the crabapple tree. "Hey, isn't this the second son of the Wang family?" A middle-aged woman in her 50s walked over from the other end of the mountain road. She cried, not covering up, and greeted her mother from afar. "I saw her when I was a kid. My mother, who grew up eating 100 families, gave birth to me shortly after she gave birth to a son, but unfortunately her son died prematurely. Her husband gambled and drank, beat her all day long, and later ran away with a woman. Some people in the village pity her and gave her some food. Some people liked to gossip behind their backs and said that she was not lucky and that she was lonely. And she seemed to have never taken these words to heart. She often said, 'How much harder can one suffer? Are there always people in the world who live more tired than themselves?' Maybe because I am about the same age as her dead son, she likes to come and see me. Poor, so you can't bring some candy toys like other neighbors and relatives. However, she is skillful and always folds some villains and animals with pieces of paper. The flowers, plants and branches on the roadside can also make her look interesting under her fingers. She is old now and still stays in the village." Seeing her mother, she speeded up, "You came back alone? Didn't the girl accompany you?" She didn't notice the small mound behind her, or she wouldn't think about that even if she saw it. "Think about it, it's time for my mother to take the college entrance exam, right?" My mother sniffed and didn't say anything. "Yeah, is a good child," she patted her mother's hand. "I remember she wanted to be a painter." My mother's eyes widened. She didn't expect that everyone seemed to understand me, and only she, the mother, was so unfamiliar with me. The woman had a loud voice and recalled the past. Yeah, liked painting since she was a child. I remember when I went to see her, she painted it with a colored pen on a piece of cardboard. I said, "What are you painting?" She said she was painting her mother. "Drawing, you are sitting next to the windowsill knitting a sweater." I just asked Yaya, "What do you want to do when you grow up?" "Make a wish." She said, "I want to be a painter and paint mother." Children do not understand money, do not understand success, do not understand first place, and be the best. At that time, I only knew how to rely on my mother. A mother's wish is to let her daughter grow up safely. Her daughter's wish is to draw the most beautiful mother one day. Mom, our bond has always been like this, deep. After the woman left, the mother covered her face. Her originally soft sob turned into a loud cry. Tears kept sliding down her cheeks and smashing into the soil. After my death, she was always insufficiency and restrained. Until this moment, she seemed to finally turn on the switch and released all her regret, pain, sadness, and guilt. Resentment, "I'm sorry," she choked while wiping tears on the back of her hand. "You must hate me very much, right?" "I hate me why I put so much pressure on you. I hate me and I don't understand you at all. Mom now knows me wrong. If I could do it again, Mom will definitely not force you anymore. Maybe I have woken up countless times late at night, felt guilty and blamed myself for a wrong question countless times, and collapsed under the pressure of age ranking countless times. Maybe I hated you, why did you give birth to me? And even hated why did you give birth to me only? I don't have the idea of dying only twice, but many more times. At the critical moment, I thought of you. I am the only child, what should you do if I die? But now I want to reconcile with the world, I want to forgive you. I don't want to bear any resentment and pain anymore. I want to hug my mother." But the body without real sense could only be restlessly on her body. The cool breeze blew across my body, and the crabapple petals passed through my fingers and landed on my mother's shoulders. I had a premonition that I was about to disappear, leaving the world where my mother was, and falling into the unknown distance with the next gust of wind blowing from the mountains. My mother felt something, and she stood up, with tears still hanging on her eyes, and murmured, "Resentment, are you leaving?" "I'm leaving, Mom." Mother turned around. Walked slowly down the mountain road. This time my soul didn't keep up. Her back left me with the last sentence alone. "If there is a next life, be a happy child." The whole text is over. I can only remember the dog at Kaching's house, even herself.